any system where you are delegating your decision making and core engineering craft to the machines without the guardrails, that's a recipe for disaster.
Hey, folks, welcome back to Executive Runtime. I'm your host, Johnny Austin. Today, I have a very special guest, Smruti Patel. She's the SVP of Engineering at Apollo GraphQL. She previously led Stripe's data platform, spent over a decade at VMware shipping critical infrastructure products, and holds a master's in computer science from Stony Brook. Smruti, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Johnny. Thanks so much for having me here. It's a privilege.
Yeah. I'm so glad we finally got a chance to chat. So we were introduced by a mutual friend way back the beginning of summer, may have been before summer, and I had some stuff going on, and you had some stuff going on, and finally now, mid-November, we have the opportunity to chat. So I'm super excited.
Yeah, they're very same.
So just kind of starting off to where you are today, right? Tell me a little bit about, your role at Apollo GraphQL and, how you fit in there and just sort of like, just tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I lead all things engineering, security, and data here at Apollo. Been here getting just over 3 years now. I used to report into the CTO, who's now our CEO, and my partners in crime are the other executive staff members, like our CCO, our SVP of product. And my role here is to not just support our existing enterprise customers, but to also help Apollo build the next gen API orchestration platform. And through that, support our customers at whatever phase of the adoption journey they might be in. And so that what that entails is supporting scale for scaling customers, ensuring the onboarding and activation is as smooth and as delightful for them, and also
Mhm.
ensuring that we're looking 1 to 3 to 5 years ahead, especially as we see new opportunities emerge for the new problems that are coming up for our users.
I want to get into all of that, but first I want to rewind the clock a little bit and kind of go back to what's your origin story? How did you get into engineering leadership? Just kind of what was that spark that really kind of delved you into this crazy world?
Yep, that's a great question. I think for me, um, I think what makes me me goes back to the city I'm from. I spent more than half my life in the city of Mumbai, the city that never sleeps. And that's where I grew up. I was very fortunate to have parents who raised their two daughters with the right ideals and values and said, work hard, no cutting corners, and sky's the limit, right? Like, be honest citizens of the world. And I think through some of those foundations is where I figured out my interest was in math and science. And that naturally led me to a bachelor's in computer engineering there. And this love for STEM and this pursuit for, hey, I could be learning and being a better version of myself is what then prompted me to leave Mumbai and go to New York for a degree in computer science.
Mhm.
But for me, I think I like to think about this as my heart, mind, and soul in many ways, which is my heart's Mumbai, my mind is the Bay Area, and my soul is New York for all the three cities that give me so much. I started from Mumbai, and I think a lot of my core values come from there. It's
Mhm.
in Mumbai, where on a day when there's torrential downpour, you still decide to cross the streets to help that old lady,
Mhm.
even if your umbrella's upturned while you're crossing the street.
Yep.
Uh, you know there is no time or opportunity to waste because there's precious little to go around. Um,
Mhm.
it also instilled in me the sense of once you sign up and commit to something, you stick through it. So
Yep.
even if you had to wade through waist deep water, you went and gave that electronics examination. And so
Mhm.
when I think about what makes me me, a lot of those values, empathy, efficiency, engagement, come down to some of my roots.
Those are some very powerful values to kind of bring with you, as you make your way into the world. It kind of begs the question for me, did you have any incidents or times during your career where you were asked to do something or you felt like you had to do something that were kind of pushing against those values where you had to kind of make a choice or sacrifice them for any reason?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think um, I'd say there are absolutely times, especially as you're scaling your own career journey and thinking about what you deeply care about, where
Hmm.
it comes either at the expense of one or the other. And I think for me, even my decision to leave Mumbai to come to New York
Hmm.
and study a master's degree when I didn't know how I would support myself or my
Yeah.
financial obligations was this tug of war in many ways between being efficient with my money and resources back in the time, but
Yeah.
also being highly engaged and committed to this pursuit for learning.
Hmm.
And some of that also played out later on in life when I think about some of my pivotal moments. And I think there are a few which really, really come to mind there. The first was I think it was in my 30s when I discovered the Mindset book by Carol Dweck. And until then, my career had been very methodical and structured. Straight A's, masters in CS, software engineer at a fast growing startup, manager, senior manager. And so there's this steady incremental progress. And it was very much of the one foot in front of the other, right, and playing it safe. But that book really flipped the switch for me. And what I realized was I'd probably been operating with this fixed mindset for my career path. And so I decided to throw myself in at the deep end. And here's where I think of career transitions along three dimensions: domain, role, and social capital. And what I've learned is if you change one, you tend to hit your stride in 2 to 3 months. If you change two of those axes, you typically take 6 to 9 months. And if you change all three, it typically takes you over a year to get past the original hump. And so for me, if I think about, I was at VMware back then, I was managing managers in a virtualization space where everybody knew me. And I decided to throw myself at the deep end where I said, okay, I'm going to take on an opportunity at Stripe where I'm leading just two engineers solving for cloud cost efficiency in a place where not many really knew me. And so throwing myself in at the deep end and focusing on growth, but not titles or fame or status or what have you, um, also tore me apart in some ways along the three dimensions which made me me. So this moment really stood out for what you were asking.
That's a really interesting point. I like that three domain model, and especially when you talk about the social capital piece. And really, I don't think many people do that calculus when they're considering new opportunities. I think to your point, it's more about, well, what's the new title I get, compensation, things like that. But really honing in on focusing on that growth is really, really important. You have to drop a lot of ego sometimes in order to make the right move. So, I mean, that's something that, I'm sure we could talk about. But speaking of social capital in general, I mean, just coming here to the States and then, kind of pivoting your entire life, how did you initially build that network of people coming over as an immigrant leader and just sort of kind of starting from scratch and then, showing or proving yourself and really becoming the successful professional that you've become today?
Johnny, that's a great question, and I wish I wish I had a good solid strategy, but I didn't. I didn't really have one. For me, it was so much about focusing on just doing your best work, showing up consistently, really, really nailing results. I think for me, one of my past managers has also said, it's Smriti, you're wired for results and outcomes. And
Yep.
let that speak first. So for me, when I came to, in fact, VMware from Stony Brook, I was, I think, 20 something, fresh off the plane. And I
Hmm.
chose Palo Alto over the Goldman Sachs and the Citigroups of New York because
Hmm.
believe it or not, my young self picked the blue skies, white fluffy clouds. There were even horses in Palo Alto.
Oh, wow.
You
Okay.
know, and so I was young and naive, but determined to sort of make a mark. And
Hmm.
I think for me, just looking back, it's the immigrant experience just gives you something valuable, right? It brought
Yeah.
with me, it was about grit and adaptability.
Mhm.
Growing up in Mumbai, it had taught me already that, hey, you can't squander time or space or opportunity because
Yep.
you don't have to go around. And so I already came with that empathy and efficiency as my core operating DNA. I had to learn some very hard lessons, right? Over the years, I constantly experienced how men got hired for potential and women for performance.
Mm.
So my attempt at that was I'm going to just work 10x harder to be undeniably good. And looking back, it wasn't fair, right? It's not a fair system, but that was the reality I had to navigate. And I came across this five framework, which is performance, impact, exposure, and that really opened my eyes because it was it was talking about how at senior levels exposure accounts for over 40% of your career success. So it wasn't just about doing the work, right? Like my naive self was like, just do great works and the results will follow. But that wasn't enough. The next mark then was I was doing the right work to land the impact, but also who's really aware about the work, how exposed is what you are delivering and the impact you are landing. And so from
Mhm.
then on, I started to get very intentional about building my own personal brand and the network over the years. I became intentional about finding other women leaders because I just saw the ratios get worse as I advanced from 30% or so in undergraduate to 10% in grad school to
Mhm.
5% in early teens, right? I was the only woman engineer in a room full of 15 men. And I felt a bit weird. So for me, I was like, okay, how do I actively seek out other women leaders who've navigated similar challenges? And so it wasn't a coincidence after that point. It was a very deliberate community building to find like minded professionals. And you talked about credibility. So,
Yeah.
what I've learned over the years is a lot of that credibility came from execution, results, delivery, but also authenticity, right? I didn't try to fit a mold or
Mhm.
a mask because, well, I did at first, but I learned better. And so for me, the question consistently was, how do I bring my whole self, right? I'm a systems thinker, or I'm a results oriented leader. I'm the executive who cares deeply about people. I'm a mother to two boys. I'm the immigrant who understands scarcity. And so, how do I take all these and make it more than the sum of my parts, right? And that's what I saw because what I learned was at the end of the day, when you're low ego, when you are authentic, when you're curious, when you're humble, and you deliver results, that credibility just follows.
That's a really good point. I like the discussion you had about the exposure piece, right? Because that's really challenging for a lot of people, right? There are many talented women in the workplace who are far less likely to advocate for themselves. And so maybe they don't get that exposure as sort of like their male peers would get. Do you have any words of wisdoms or advice for folks who might find themselves in those positions where they know they're doing really great work, they can quantify their impact, but for whatever reason, they're not being recognized, and maybe it has something to do with them not advocating for themselves.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think for me, I'd say 100%. The only person who is driving your career is you. You have to be behind that wheel. And it can be very uncomfortable, right? Giving my own example, I was raised with this saying, and there's the Sanskrit saying, Karmanye tu adhikarasya ma phaleshu kadachana. And again, I think I'm butchering it, but what it's trying to convey is do your hard work, forget about the results, right? So a lot of that is what I
Mhm.
would start off with, to just thinking that, hey, you do the hard work, you do good work, and the rest will come as it comes. And and to your point, I've learned that that is not sufficient. The kind of work matters, the kind of impact matters. And
Mhm.
so in terms of exposure or self-advocacy, I think the things that I've learned, um, one, this is where I love Stripe. Stripe has had normalized this notion of a brag doc where every engineer would write up what they've done, the impact they've had, the cross team collaboration, results they unlocked. And so it was normalized for engineers, engineering managers, and people to just have that ready reference of things that they've done, whether in the
Hmm.
day-to-day work or even outside their work, which they believe sort of enhance their craft. And so I really like that concept because it normalizes the importance of talking about your work, taking pride in it, and then sharing it, especially when the time comes, because most engineering organizations have performance rituals, right? Whether they are
Hmm.
quarterly, semi-annual, or annual. And in those times, if your manager isn't aware of where you are, things you've done, how else would they be able to calibrate and assess your performance? So, in terms
Hmm.
of exposure, I think I'd say that personal brag dog of what you achieved goes a long way to sort of provide visibility, at the very least, to your manager. And the other bits that I've also found are finding other people who are at similar stages of your journey and
Hmm.
consistently asking yourself, and this is an exercise I do with my directs, which is imagine a year out in your life. Where would you like to be? And this takes into account a whole career growth conversation, which starts from, which season of life you're in, because there's no cookie cutter approach to career growth. Um,
Hmm.
Somebody's in the spring, somebody's in the winter. And so,
Yep.
depending on where you are in your life, what does the next 1 year professionally need to look like? And,
Yep.
and, and as you start thinking about what that year is and you're living in that future, like imagine it's November 2026,
Hmm.
what would make Smriti super excited about what Smriti's done in life? And then you sort of work backward from there to say what kind of opportunities are you then seeking out to be able to achieve and land those outcomes, and
Yep.
have those conversations very intentionally with your manager, and then ensuring your manager is advocating for some of these even outside the organization, depending on the level that you are at, right? And
Yep.
here's where underrepresented minorities are over mentored and under sponsored. So for me,
Hmm.
a big thing in terms of creating opportunities comes down to, the four S's: skills, scope, support, and sponsorship, right? And how you then ensure that once you know where you want to be, you can have that conversation in terms of what you need to be able to get there with not just your manager, but then a support system which is collectively pushing for your success.
Yes. I love that. I love the point you made about people driving their own careers. I have one of those manager readmes, how to work with me. And in there I talk about this. It's something along the lines of, as your manager or leader, I'm your navigation software, but you are the driver, right? So if you drive and not tell me where you want to go, we'll end up somewhere, but I can't predict where. Or you tell me where you want to go, but if you don't drive, we'll never get there. And
Yeah.
so I really, and it reminds me of that concept. And so, yeah, really honing on people taking sort of like their career into their hands and like they're being the ones driving there. It's going to just unlock a lot of doors for you. So I love that point.
And Johnny, I love this bit about your navigation system. I'm going to add that to my car driving analytics.
Do it, do it. I love that. Awesome. So you've been in leadership for a while, and so tech changes very quickly. I'm curious on just your take on how you've seen the tech industry change over the past 20 years, specifically as it relates to what it wants from senior leaders, right? And it was very different in the mid 2000s than it is now in the mid 2020s. I'm curious on like what your observations are of like what's needed now that maybe it wasn't 10 years ago that people should look out for, and where you think it might change in over the next 5, 10 years.
It's a great question. I think I've been in tech for about 2 decades now. And I think I've seen about two to three different waves of how engineering leadership has evolved over the years. For me, it started with VMware. That's where I made my first transition from being an IC, an engineer, to being a manager.
Hmm.
And the first shift I saw was this dissolution of the command and control model, right? Almost 20 years ago, back at VMware, there was still this expectation that managers were bosses who had all the answers.
Yep.
And that for me was one of the biggest mistakes I made back in the day as well, having the same expectation of myself. And what I see over the years is today the best engineering leaders are coaches and they are enablers. engineering managers are seen to be clear coaches over the years. And for me, it's
Hmm.
beautiful to see because there's this revelation that to truly maximize team performance and productivity, each of us needs to tap into that intrinsic motivation, right? Which is not about when someone's clocking in or clocking out. And so there is this shift from focusing on intrinsic performance, and then taking that and shifting from individual heroics to team outcomes, right? It's no longer about that lone brilliant engineer who's saving the day, because at the end of the
Hmm.
day, it's not scalable, right? It's not
Yeah.
sustainable. And so the one of the shifts I saw was modern engineering leadership is a lot about building those systems where our teams are collectively delivering magic for our users.
Hmm.
The other one I've seen is also around measurement and visibility. In the early days, there were these vanity metrics where you'd be like, hey, lines of code and commits, and those are the
Oh my
things that were
goodness.
tracked. And oh
Yeah.
my God, you remember that, right? It was
Yes.
nasty. And some of us who knew this whole system thinking, we're like, "Yeah, that just smells wrong. Like it's not about how many engineers painted how many walls." And so seeing that change, right? My own framework on how I think about engineering velocity is about four dimensions: precision, speed, quality, and impact, right? Precision is about, are you solving the right problem at the right time for your users and
Hmm.
your business? Speed is how fast can you solve it? Things
Yep.
like lead time are captured here. Quality is, how good and high quality your work is. This is about craftsmanship, about user
Hmm.
delight. And all of this then is born from vision, strategy, and tactics, right? Where you're focusing more on outcomes over outputs. So the second big shift I've seen over the years is this openness to not focus on vanity metrics anymore, but to truly shift left engineering delivery. So you're collectively driving more outcomes and
Hmm.
impact for the world. And the last, and this one is a little more recent, is around some of the democratization of knowledge. When I started learning about management, was read one or two books, maybe do an MBA, and that was all there is. And in addition to that, you just hope your manager was reasonably good that they put you
Hmm.
on the rails. But now there are leadership roundtables, there are executive dinners and meetups, and there's this content and communities of like-minded professionals who just love their craft of engineering leadership. And so what I have seen evolve a lot over the years, and this is very, very exciting, is that the bar for what good and great look like has
Hmm.
risen dramatically over the years, right? And that's beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely agree with your points about the vanity metrics. I remember those lines of code days, and yeah, it was a dark time. I am curious though, on the other side of that, if I could be a devil's advocate a little bit, without those metrics, which are relatively easy to measure. I think that's why old school managers took to them so well. Um, how do you evaluate performance these days, right? I mean, it's a really hard thing, right? Because you talked about craftsmanship. Like, how do you measure good craftsmanship, when it comes to software engineers in particular?
Johnny, that's a great question. And that one continues to keep me up at night because guess what we're all faced with these days, right? Coding agents and AI
Hmm.
in every aspect of the SDLC. So I think before I bring in that kind of beautiful words, just focusing on the recent past. I think for me, it goes down to that framework of precision, speed, quality, impact, right? What problems
Hmm.
did you solve? I think if I take even my recent experience at Apollo, for me, it is a lot about, did we move the needle for the business?
Yeah.
How many customers did we bring on? How many customers are we retaining because they love our product? How much joy do they find in the first few minutes, first few hours, first few days with our product? How do we
Hmm.
track some of that? What are the tight feedback loops where we are learning and hearing from our customers and where the product fails to meet their expectations, right?
Yeah.
And because we are core platform where we support everything from Wayfair's retail day to New York Times supporting the election. it
Hmm.
becomes very crucial to then focus on things like operational excellence. And so and this comes to that speed and quality portion where it's around, okay, how many self-inflicting incidents did we cause? What are the SLOs? How do we raise the bar on operational excellence? And
Hmm.
so all of this is still layered with this overarching mindset of systems thinking, right? Which is no single system, no engineer is individually awesome or
Hmm.
broken in isolation, right? Like
Yep.
there are all these moving pieces and adjacencies which you then have to diagnose to truly assess the collective performance. And then you start seeing what individual delivery has looked like. So
Hmm.
once you have a North Star, you're like, okay, what needle are you trying to move for your users or your business? That's the business strategy. And then you layer in your product and technical strategy to say, okay, what do we have to then go build to solve for some of these problems for our users and the business? And you
Yep.
then tie it up with the last bit, which is where are your individuals? Where are your teams? What is the skill set on the team? Have you supported the team to be able to go solve the challenging problems that are lining up? And that covers the precision, speed, quality aspect. And for
Hmm.
this, we do have existing frameworks. I think the DORA evolved into space. So things like lead time, things
Hmm.
like mean time between failures and mean time to recovery or post incident. Those are some
Yep.
of the metrics. We look at weekly. We started from monthly review of our operational excellence, and then we moved that to from monthly to weekly to be able to be on point of where our systems and services weren't meeting our user needs, where were our engineers burning out, thanks to
Hmm.
being paged at 2 in the night or for pages which woke them up after
Yep.
hours. And so it's a collective package of sorts, right? There is no such one PR kind of metric because that's a cop out when you're thinking
Hmm.
about all things that you have to do as an engineer and an engineering team because
Yep.
you're supporting mission critical workloads. So it
Right.
doesn't matter if you wrote 10 extra lines of code if you caused five sev zeros at the end of the day. So
Yeah.
that's how I've been thinking about metrics and using them, where
Yep.
it isn't a world where you have nothing to look at, but at the same time your eyes wide open about the holistic picture of what
Hmm.
you as an organization are collectively driving for your users.
So since you brought it up, let's talk a little bit about AI. So it's taken over our industry, and it's one of the fastest growing technological paradigms I've certainly seen in my entire career. I'm sure it's very similar to you as well. And now that engineers have this shiny new tool to get work done, first of all, are you an advocate for engineers utilizing AI to get work done? Is it all rainbows and sunshine, or is there a catch here? Should we be worried about anything? Do you see this proliferating over time? Are we hitting a wall? Just like, I'm curious on your whole take on the phenomenon overall.
That's a great question. It does keep me up at night. I am currently in the state where I myself am a lot more productive. I ended up updating my website in a over a weekend, which would has otherwise taken me many, many hours and weeks once I even got the time to do it. So I think
Hmm.
for me, the meta question isn't so much as are you a believer or a skeptic these days, right?
Hmm.
AI is here. And as an engineering leader, the question in front of you is then where do you see this as a tool, as both a horizontal and a vertical enabler for your organization to solve ultimately for what you need to do, right? Like going back to my, what are you here for? And as an engineering org, for most software oriented companies, the engineering teams are the biggest asset for any organization. And so the question in front of you then is what does good and great look like for your engineering teams to be able to deliver what the business needs? And I think with that
Hmm.
framing, when you're anchored on business impact, your user needs, the question is then about the how do you go about it? And
Yep.
on that journey, what I have noticed in in my own organization at Apollo is it varies. We've got senior engineers who are experts in their domain be a lot more productive, especially when they have to go diagnose issue in new code bases or
Yep.
when they are helping mentor and onboard new engineers to be able to explain how some of this complex infrastructure platform really works under the hood. And for some of that, where the senior engineers know what they're talking about and know how the system works,
Hmm.
leveraging AI and coding assistants to be able to polish something else out.
Yep.
Um, those are the positive use cases. Another area where we're seeing value is the technical delivery, right? Which is a lot goes into shipping a feature or a product improvement than just writing code. And
Hmm.
so for us, it starts from what is the product evolution using AI. And once we know
Hmm.
what that looks like, how do we bring this into the engineering elements of how we write code?
Yep.
And all aspects of SDLC, from writing to testing to then operating. And here is where we see some of the costs balloon out, where if an engineer didn't know a new code base, or if it was a junior engineer who's just coming up to speed, without the guardrails of what these coding assistants are spitting out, it can be hard to navigate things like code reviews. In
Hmm.
code reviews are getting longer, they're getting more complex. And in fact, it was just a few weeks ago, one of my senior engineers like, Smruti, this code is a mess. How are we going to, what are we going to do if I get paged at 2 in the night, right? Like
Yeah.
super legit concern. And so the downside with some of these things are you need other systems and other guardrails to ensure all other bits post the code is written are
Hmm.
also on point to be able to be effective across the entire cycle, right? And
Yeah.
this is where coding agents, they're good about the happy path, not so good about the edge cases, and not so
Hmm.
good about how things might work at scale. And so for me, what I have observed is there are certain use cases, whether it's 0 to 1 and prototyping and rapid prototyping, whether it's going from Figma design to a prototype, whether it is a senior engineer jumping into a new code base. Some of those areas are where we're seeing a lot of productivity
Hmm.
with. Having said that, any system where you are delegating your decision making and core engineering craft to the machines without the guardrails, that's a recipe for disaster, right? So, and that for me,
Hmm.
thinking is more like it isn't about is AI good or AI evil. It's about how we as humans are putting in
Yeah.
those checks and balances to
Yeah.
see that this all works as we intended to.
Yeah, it's just like any other powerful tool, right? If you know what you're doing and you're careful, you can get a lot done. If you don't know what you're doing or you're careless, then you're going to do a lot of damage to your point. Um, I'm curious on how should, because I don't really know the answer to this. How should junior engineers or people who want to become software engineers, maybe they're still in school, should be thinking about this, right? Because I'm trying to understand from their perspective. There's AI, which can answer almost any question they have, right? We can talk about the accuracies of that and hallucinations and whatnot. But then there's the problem of, well, what about fundamentals, right? Do junior people still need those same fundamentals when AI exists? Is it a waste of time to learn those fundamentals when you can just use AI? Or should they still be leaning into those fundamentals and building things with, quote unquote, their own virtual hands and, relying less on AI? But if they do that, do they miss out on that AI training, that AI, native workflow? How would you advise someone make decisions around how to best, jumpstart their career in software engineering?
Johnny, that's a great question. I think deeply about that because for me, the question is, hey, what does the next bootstrap of the intern program look like if
Hmm.
and when we start one? And I think the way I think about it is, going back to my own journey, I started my journey as a QE engineer back in the day. It was a lot
Hmm.
about testing out the hypervisor, then testing out the control management software for VMware. And what I've learned over 20, 22 years and having seen at least three of these waves is learning never goes to waste. Right. And in my own journey at different intervals, I took on different domains. At Stripe, I had never learned the cloud native stack. I jumped from VMware to Stripe, changing all my axes,
Yeah.
jumping on a completely different stack. Um, I then took on data platform, and I had not worked on data platforms before. I then jumped to Apollo, where I'd never worked on GraphQL before. And now with the AI view, I'd never built an MCP server, but I just did that a few months ago. And so I think for me, the message through this is there is some level of core fundamentals and learning that will just always be with you. For me,
Mm-hmm.
where I see that being applied even 15 years or 20 years down is I know QE taught me that prevention is better than cure. So, yes, you might take the shortcut today, but you better have an eye out for what shifting left some of that work, like the true correct architectural investment looks like. And so, over the years, the way software has been written, many of the problems have had abstractions. Like for VMware, I was still thinking about the bare metal and virtualization. Things were at the compute level and the storage level. And then came the hyperscalers like the cloud. And you don't think about how EC2 really works under the hood anymore. And so with AI, there will be some concepts where which you don't have to think in the day to day, but
Mm-hmm.
broadly, if you know enough about how some of these systems work, interact, and engage, you will always be better off to be able to diagnose them, to be able to trust and hone your own gut when you are faced with making technical decisions. So
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, I think where I'm going with this is it comes back to my root of there's no shortcut to success, right? AI makes you a whole lot productive, but I also think it democratizes software and tech development to so many who may not have had the privilege of
Mm-hmm.
learning some of this ground up. So if you're
Yep.
open to learning and curious there, I think the journey is always rewarding, is I think where I'm getting at with this.
I want to pivot a little bit, talk a little bit about role scope and how people should be thinking about that. You were at Apollo as VP of Engineering, and then you transitioned to Senior Vice President. And so I'm curious on how did you prepare yourself for that transition? What type of things were you thinking about ahead of time, and how does your job change when you make that change? Because it's like it's one letter, right? It's VP to SVP, but obviously we both know it's much more involved than that. And so I'm curious on how you approach leadership at that SVP level, and, how people should be thinking about that as they try to transition from, like, manager, senior manager, director, senior director, all the way up the ladder.
That's a great question. For me, the biggest difference, if I see my own, the first 2 years at Apollo and the year that has been, is this ability to look beyond the core function, right? Like I today manage engineering security data. And
Hmm.
so a lot of the move to SVP has been how do I look beyond my functional domain
Yeah.
and continue to evolve at a pace that is in line and in fact ahead at sometimes with the evolving needs of the company, right? And that's when you're key to unlocking that next horizon of growth and bring not just your own function but the whole company forward. And so in that, I find that the SVP role is less about doing and more about being, right? Being that connective tissue where you're the strategic voice and you are the culture carrier for the entire company. And there
Hmm.
are three fundamental shifts, right? The first comes down to obviously, the scope of impact. You brought up director. At the director level, you may be optimizing for house, and this varies depending on the size of the company, depending on
Sure.
the stage of the company, right? Whether you're on Series A, B, C, D, pre-IPO, post-IPO. So some of these levels do tend to vary depending
Hmm.
on the stage of the company. But the first is scope of impact, and broadly, a director is optimizing for halves, quarter to halves. As a
Hmm.
VP, you're just nailing the next 1 to 2 years. Like what problems to solve? How do you go about it? How do you make sure you've got the right teams for it? How do you have the right leaders in place? As an SVP, you're shaping the 3, 5, ideally, 10-year trajectory for the entire company while you're
Hmm.
also making sure you've secured your current quarter and the next. And so you're
Yep.
both simultaneously in the weeds of critical decisions, but
Hmm.
also thinking about what does this organization need to look like. And by that org, it's not just what you manage, but it's also how the other parts fit together, say in 2028.
Yep.
The second is the sphere of influence, right? You're thinking a lot about how do you drive clarity and focus while you're balancing tactical short-term needs, right, with
Hmm.
strategic long-term innovation. I talked about scaling our enterprise customers. So on one hand, they're pushing the boundaries on scale, and on the other, a lot of those customers are like, hey, AI is here, and we're worried that our teams are going to use this in a way we don't want them to. So, what is the product that you're offering, Apollo? And so, we are internally going through the innovation phase while we are going through the scaling phase simultaneously.
Yep.
And so, sort of keeping both in mind is very critical, and making sure you're driving clarity not just for your org but for adjacencies, right? How should the customer success team think of supporting? How should they be seeding new opportunities? How does sales go sell what you've built out? And
Hmm.
so at the SVP level, you're influencing not just your org but peer executives, your board members, your customers, and in many parts, the broader industry, so to speak.
Yep.
And what that then translates to, and this is the subtext, which is your communication then needs to be able to work at that multiple altitudes, whether it's going technically deep to board
Hmm.
level strategy. And the third bit is a little bit of the horizon of decision making, right? Which is at the director level, you're making these tactical decisions where you have clear constraints. You more or less have ambiguity sorted out. But at VP, you're making these strategic bets with some level of ambiguity. And at
Hmm.
SVP, you're like making bets with big swaths of ambiguity. But
Yep.
you're also building core systems and feedback loops that are helping others make better decisions in spite of the ambiguity. And
Yep.
so the third element is a little of how much of the unknown are you comfortable grappling with? And in that, you're not just deciding what to build, you're deciding how do you even decide what to build, so to speak. And
Yep.
so in general, I'd say I'd sum this up as this is a role which requires executive presence in a very different way. Because you're
Hmm.
representing engineering at the highest levels, you're representing your company both internally to your investors or to your external customers. And so your credibility affects your entire company's credibility.
Yep. Something that I've been asking almost all the guests because I really like how the answers come together is how mentoring and sponsorship has played a role in your success. Obviously, as an individual, you're very intelligent and highly talented, but no one gets it done alone. And so I'm just curious on how those types of relationships have played a role in your success.
I'm a big proponent of both, making sure that there are enough sponsors that you line up. I think here's where I wish I knew about this sooner, but Lara Hogan calls this the manager version. And I didn't spend the
Hmm.
early years enough building that out. Um, but I've seen the value over the years where having a tight set of individuals who can continue to shine that mirror to you on
Hmm.
what your blind spots are, what your strengths are, in your high highs and low lows, there is this group of people who will be there consistently raising
Yep.
you up and propping you up, but at the same time saying, hey, you got that one wrong, Smriti. Right. Uh, it's very, very important, right? I just wish I'd done it way sooner. And so I'm a big fan of having both mentors, but also sponsors. And I'm at that stage where it is my own top of mind to make sure that I'm that sponsor and connecting people for new roles. I
Hmm.
have what I call a recall list, which is the list of people and the list of opportunities. And so at the right time, and then making sure I'm paying it forward by opening doors and connecting people to whom they need to meet. But in general, for me, I mean, even this conversation, Johnny, came thanks to Will Larson connecting us
Shout
together.
out to Will. Yeah.
I'm a big shout out to Will. And so I think in general, it plays a huge role for me. I just wish I'd done it sooner. And for all those who are aspiring to go through their leadership journey, I'm here. Please reach out on LinkedIn. I'd love to be that for you, whether a mentor, whether a coach, or a sponsor. Because at the end of the day, I mean, seeing people grow is what brings me joy.
Years ago, I had a boss who said something that stuck with me, and he compared managing employees to kind of like having kids to to a certain extent. And as someone with a family, I'm curious, like, does that hold up for you, or what do you think? I mean, do you Can it? I know things can get a little bit dicey with direct reports or other people, whatever. But I'm just curious if you found that to be the case.
That's an interesting question. So, just for the record, I have two boys, 9
Mm-hmm.
and 6, Sahil and Salil. And for me, I think they're both similarities and differences, right? I think to me,
Mm-hmm.
the similarities are that you care deeply. You care deeply about the teams you build, about the people whose careers you're responsible for in many ways, right? So you owe them the right showing up, the psychological
Mm-hmm.
safety where they can grow, and you're nurturing them with trust, with transparency, with radical candor and growth mindset. All the things that I'm hoping I'm doing for my kids. I'll only know once
Yeah.
they are citizens of the world. But you're absolutely doing that as you're thinking about building diverse, inclusive teams, ensuring that these teams are nailing it for the business and users, coming together as a collaborative group where each is leaning in and it's a great team
Mm-hmm.
dynamic, right? No brilliant jerks there, and all the good stuff. But at the individual level, you're tapping into their intrinsic motivation, making sure you've created the right environment which is fertile enough where they can do their best work and they can
Yeah.
shine. So, in that, I think there are similarities. I think the difference at the end of the day, these are adults, and what you
Mm-hmm.
don't want to do is sugarcoat, right? You don't want to shit
Right.
sandwich what is happening around us. Like, where at this
Yep.
time you brought up AI, there's this period of great fear, uncertainty, and doubt where people are like, hey, there are layoffs happening all over the place. We are at the end of the zero interest rate era. How do we navigate this new disruption called AI? Is it coming for my jobs? And so again, I think here is where you're not treating them as kids. These are
Yeah.
adults, they are professionals. You owe them your transparency, you owe them empathy, and you owe them the clarity of what you as a leader are here to support them with and through. And so
Yep.
that's how I'd sort of compare and contrast.
I think if you're gonna leave kids in it, I think it's closer to being a teacher, right? You have a class, you have students, you have a job to do, and you got to get them to the next level. And then, like to your point, you do care about them and all that other stuff. But at some point, they're gonna move on, and then you're gonna get the next crew. And so, yeah, I tend to think of it as teaching. But
I
uh,
love that. I think that they're my favorite one is, give them wings so they can fly, but give them
mm,
roots. They know they can come back when they want to and work with you. And in
ooh,
that
I love that.
analogy wise, for me, the kids one doesn't work as well. But I think what
Yeah.
works for me is the conductor in an orchestra,
Hmm.
um, and your navigation system, which I'm going to adopt.
Excellent, excellent. Well, if you put it in the book, just give me a quick shout out. That's all. That's all I ask for.
When I write one, Johnny, you got it.
Cool. Well, we're coming up on time already, but I wanted to kind of leave the last couple minutes. Do you have any parting words for the audience? Anything you want to leave us with that you think people should know before we part ways?
We are at a very exciting and an exhilarating time in the industry, but it can also be very exhausting because each of us have navigated the last 5 years from COVID to remote work to hyper growth to return to work to end of the ZUP to AI, and we are probably just one more change away from the next career.
That's where my gray hairs come from.
Uh, exactly, right? I mean, same. So I think the few things for me um, that resonate are: one, optimize for your own joy. Ask yourself what brings you joy at the heart of it. Why are you here? Um, and be eyes wide open about that. The other bit is you're leading teams. It's just thinking about it in terms of systems thinking at scale, because the problems we're solving now, whether it's AI infrastructure, distributed systems, global platforms, all of these require understanding complexity and interdependencies. And so leaders who can zoom in, zoom out, who can
Hmm.
connect technical decisions to business strategy, to organizational design, are going to come through forward. And what that's going to need is this adaptive, resilient leadership, which just comes from our own mindset, right? And on that, just continue honing your own self awareness, show up with humility, curiosity, because that pace of change is just accelerating, because what worked last year may not work even this year. And so being
Yeah.
comfortable with that constant reinvention will make sure that you are headed where you want to for your defined North Star. And along the way, you will build teams which make some magic and build some really beautiful stuff.
Well said. Well, Smruti, I really appreciate your time today. This has been really great. Thanks again. You've been really gracious, and best of luck.
Thank you so much, Jared. This was great. Thanks again for having me. And good luck to the next ones too.
If you enjoyed today's guest and you'd like to help support the show, please subscribe, leave a rating, and share this episode. As always, thank you to our listeners, and be sure to tune in to the next episode of Executive Runtime.